Okay.
All right, so we're gonna work on the 1999 Ford Explorer. We found that it had a leak from the rear cover. It also had a pinion leak. That's gonna be a different video. But what we're gonna do right now is actually like a differential service, and then we're also gonna pull off the axle shaft and show you how to do that on a just regular Dana differential. This is where I was talking about the pinions, the axle shaft seal leaking. Okay, if you had an axle shaft seal leaking, the oil would leak out of the back side of this this hub here, and it would coat, in this case, the parking brake shoes with gear oil, and it would smell and stink. So we have no leak here, but we do have a leak at the cover. So we're going to just do a regular differential service right now. All right, so 13mm bolts all the way around. It's sealed with silicone. Be careful of the little tags right here that has all the information of the differential. It gives you the gear ratio and everything. So we're not going to go over that until a little bit later in the video. So just be cautious when this that this might go around. It could actually hurt you. Okay? I'm going to take this right here, and I'm going to actually start it 1 or 2 threads, and that's going to keep the pan from falling. And now I can just go ahead and take all these off. All right, so we're starting the leak. Yeah, they didn't do a good job at all. And then you can see why I left 1 bolt here. Okay, and I really like these drain catches. Okay, for one, you just dump the bolts right in there, and it doesn't go into the deep oil underneath. So normally you would have to take a screwdriver. If it was sealed properly, you would have to take a screwdriver and hit this into the back side of it, but we don't have to do that because my high school students already did a horrible job sealing this. As a matter of fact, I don't think they used silicone. All right, yeah, they didn't silicone it. They just bolted right back up. So now we're ready to start cleaning. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get a rag, and I'm going to wipe this down right here. And what I like using is the Scotch-Brite die grinder. Okay, so I'm going to put the die grinder with the Scotch-Brite pad on it, which is what I use in the dry shaft video. Okay, and die grinders, make sure you put oil in it because they always tend to burn out really fast. Safety glasses. Get my pan. If there are high spots, you need to take a ball peen hammer and hammer those down. So rub your hand all the way around and see if you feel any high spots when there's a bolt. I don't feel any, so now we need to go clean out the solvent tank, and then I'll be back. So it's always a good idea to get any of the oil residue off. For transmissions, differentials, your best friend is brake clean. Evaporates really fast. It gets in all the residue off. Just be careful when you're spraying it. It tends to spray right back at you when you hit these bolt holes. So if you're worried about it, put it in a rag and do it that way. So I still have some silicone residue on here, so that's why I'm using the brake clean. Get that silicone residue off, and this is clean. So now our next step is we're going to remove the axle shaft. Okay, so there's a 5/16 bolt right here. You take this bolt out. It has to be perfectly placed so it will come out. Now my students were doing differential work, which tells me why this was in this position. Because if I were to rotate this, you won't be able to get it out in certain places because it won't be the clearance. You see it right here. It's a little clearance so you can slide this bolt out. This bolt has a pin that goes through this pin. So in order to take the axle shaft out, back up a little bit. In order to take this axle shaft out right here, we got to remove that bolt and that pin and remove a C-clip, okay? It's one of the fastest repairs out there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. I'm going to break it free. Yep, we already had this out last year because they didn't torque it properly. When you put things back together, torque it to spec. You know, we're dealing with high school students here, so that's why it was kind of loose, okay? But I didn't have to turn my differential, so I didn't have to shift the transmission into neutral. I believe the parking brake's released, yep, so I don't need to worry about that. And we're going to take this out. Almost there. Here's the big long pin, okay? And then this pin right here will come out right here. And so the way it works is this pin goes inside here and holds that in place. So now I could take my axle shaft, so we need to be video over here. Can you hit stop? Okay, so now you have play in your axle shaft here. So since the pin's out now, it will go in further. And because it goes in further, there is a C-clip in here that we can remove. A pocket screwdriver is a really good tool to have for this. Let's see. And why I do this, you'll notice if you go underneath here, this has clutches in here. So this is a limited slip differential. Okay, so it's actually here's the clip. Let's get that out. So it has clutches in there. It's a limited slip or a locking differential. I get another screwdriver. Let me get it that way. And I think I got it. There we go. And that is how you remove an axle shaft. And let's see if we can get that clip. And I want to show you how it works. So here's the clip. So that clip is an O-ring inside here, and that holds it so it doesn't fall out. So it actually sticks in there because of that O-ring. You got to have that O-ring in there. Okay, one of the lab sheets you're going to do in the shop next week is removing an axle shaft and removing an axle shaft seal and also a bearing. Okay, so you need a slide hammer. You need to have the right bearing adapter. There are 3 of these in here. Okay, it's going to take the smallest one. We're going to put this on here. And then we're going to slide, make sure you're all the way down with this. Do not just turn on it, it needs to stop spinning. And then you slide this in, you make sure you're on the bearing. So look inside there, you see that bearing inside there? You're inside that bearing. When you slide it, you better not have your finger where it's going to hit, okay? And you're going to slide that seal by hitting the bearing, and you'll see, eventually you'll see the bearing and the seal pop out, okay? Go ahead and stop. So when you go back in, there's actually a special tool made by Rotunda or Ford where it's like a dowel that goes inside here. It protects the seal and it keeps the spring from popping off the back of the seal, the tension spring. So all seals that go around a shaft have a retention spring in the back that squeezes that seal against that whatever's rotating. So there's a special tool that goes in here, keeps that solid, and then it's fit perfectly to this. When you're working in a shop though, sometimes you got to improvise. This is the high school, I don't have that special tool. An oversized socket, this is an axle socket for a 4-wheel drive, and you're going to hit that in. Make sure before you pull these out, you pay attention to how deep they're recessed in there. Because when you go back in, you need to be the same depth and recessed inside the axle tube. So this socket actually would not work sufficiently because it would have stopped where it's flush, and you could see clearly that this axle seal and this bearing is about 1/8 of an inch further in. So you would need to get a smaller size socket. Make sure the socket hits the edge of the seal so that you don't put a dent in it. So here's the tag. Sometimes the tag will give you the gear ratio and it will say 373 right on there. This is only telling us the oil. So it's a 75W140 differential fluid or gear oil, and it needs to be synthetic. And because we are a limited slip locking differential, so you see the clutches right here, okay? And you see the spring right here. There's a set of clutches here, there's a set of clutches here. So this differential locks if one starts to spin and the other one doesn't. Locking differentials or limited slip on Ford required a special additive. And you put in regular gear oil, and then you got to put that limited slip additive in there, or you're going to have a chattering problem on your with your differential on takeoff. So you got to have that additive in there. Okay. My axle shaft, you don't want to drag the splines on your seal. If you drag your splines on the seal when you go in, you could cut it. So you got to actually lift it and slide it in gently, not putting pressure on that seal. You're going to be splining into what we call the pinion spider gears, or the side gears actually. So when you hit that, you got to actually kind of tilt this up, and then it'll slide in. So what you're doing is you're lifting it kind of up on that end, and then you turn it and it should go in. We grab our little C-clip right here, and we should be able to slip that right inside there. Okay, sometimes you need to give this a little push. All right, so I'm having a little problem with this. So, oh, look at that. See, look at that. I was able to move the differential over. I'm wondering about these bearings. We've had this apart, so we're going to do that in a later video. But this differential is shifting back and forth, which tells me it's not really the bearing. It's probably missing a shim on one side or the other. So I'm going to now, I can put that clip back inside there like this. Once when you get that clip in, then you take your axle shaft right here and you pull it out, and you'll see that clip disappear. See? There we go. So you got to get that clip to go inside the side gear right here, so you should not be able to see the clip anymore. I have the axle shaft in, I have the clip in, I pushed it out. Now I can install my pin. Okay, and this is going to be challenging because you can see my spider gears kind of slipped here, so I'm going to have to realign my spider gears. There we go, and they're under tension because of those clutches, so it's going to be a little challenging to get it perfectly aligned. I think I got it. So now I can get this, and I think I can put the pin in right here. So let's see, get the hole facing the hole for the bolt. And sometimes it kind of helps to put a screwdriver in there. Nope. Need to line it a little bit more up. All right, so we got that pin lined up, and what I end up doing is Jordy, who's videotaping it, he actually, when I was trying to push the pin in, he turned the axle shaft, and that moved those spider gears enough to line the holes up. So now I can go ahead and put this in. Put my pinion bolt in. And again, you're going to torque this to spec. And for a little faster, I'm going to use my 1/4-inch ratchet, the 5/16 socket. Gear oil makes sockets slippery. There we go. Not on there real good, so there we go. Yeah. and then you would torque that to spec, okay? But whatever you do, do not over torque that bolt, because I've had it happen where I almost had to throw the differential away. They broke the bolt off and it left a little bit of thread in there, and the pin was inside the pin, and it took hours to get that little pit. I had to remove the differential cap. It took hours to take that pin out with an extractor set. Whatever you do, never over torque that pin. All right, I actually really like the silver gasket maker, the ultimate gasket maker from Permatex. Permatex is a great brand. Okay, so I'm gonna put a bead of silicone on this. I'm gonna go around inside each bolt hole. I think too many people use too much silicone, and you don't need a lot of silicone to make this seal. Gear oil is very thick stuff. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to take my finger, and then I'm actually going to spread this around. All right. The rule is on silicone, let it sit for a minute or two so it gets a glaze. Okay, so I'm going to spread this around all the way around. And you want it to get a tacky glaze to the surface, so 1 to 2 minutes, and then we can put this on. Okay, and stop. All right, make sure you have no leftover gear oil on there. Surface is clean. Okay, I let this sit already for a few minutes. I'm going to put this up, and then I'm going to start my bolts. I'm professional in one way. I always like to have it where the owner of the car can see no evidence that you touched the car, except for maybe it's clean and everything. So this was in this hole. I'm going to put it back in that hole. I try to put everything back the way it's supposed to go. Start these bolts 2 to 3 turns by hand. If you can't get them started 2 to 3 turns, then you need to take a extractor set, or not extractor, you need to take a tap and die set, and you need to clean those bolt holes, those threads, and we're going to do that later. Say this one right here. Oh, there we go. Okay, I would almost replace that one, or clean those threads up. So all these thread in real nice. And I really don't have a problem using air tools when I do this myself, or when I was in the shop. But you could argue torque it to spec, so star pattern though. 1, 2, and it's not gonna, and you notice I'm not wrenching on this. I'm running it down snug, and that's all you have to do, because these bolts aren't, it's not like a head gasket where it has to have the pressure. All you're doing is really squeezing the silicone, and you should get a little silicone squeezed out, but the silicone is what seals it. And yet I've had people break these bolts off because they didn't know what they were doing, and now you got to use the extractor set to get those off. When in doubt, use a torque wrench. When you become years of experience, yeah, you're going to see guys use these air tools to do this. Okay, wipe off any excess oil, and then I would take my couple cans of brake clean, and I would clean at least from the sway bar bushing to the sway bar bushing. I would clean this all up with something, and I probably would have done that before I did the axle cover. I would have just cleaned all this, but you want to show that you did a good job for the customer. Okay. All right, so now I can put my rotor on, and my caliper, you never let a caliper hang from the flex line right here, so that's why I use these bungee cords. Okay, bungee cord, it keeps the caliper from falling and damaging your flex line. There's little clips that hold this caliper in place, so these need to be properly installed. So in order to do an axle seal, you pretty much have to do a brake job. And so this is the perfect time to sell brakes. Okay. So one thing leads to another. So in the shop, when I was a mechanic in the shop, I would get other mechanics really upset at me. And they'd go, why is Fleming doing a brake job? He's the transmission guy. And their answer would be, because he upsold it. And they really couldn't argue with that. And yet, I loved my paycheck because I would upsell the brakes whenever I saw they needed brakes, especially if there was gear oil quoted on this. Okay? One other thing I noticed it needs, this car, you would want to sell those sway bar bushings. These sway bar bushings are cracked. I would sell those. I have a leaking shock right here. I would sell that leaking shock. So based on just standing here, God, you would make, you know, probably 5 hours to 8 hours between your differential, your axle seal, sway bar bushings, and your shocks. Maybe not 8 hours. 5 hours would be good.